As we near the end of this year, we continue to look back on the best of this year. The Atlantic is debuting The Atlantic 10, a list of 10 books that made the team there think the most in the past year. Joining us now, senior editor for books at The Atlantic, Gul Beckerman. Gul, thank you for joining us. Give us just a sense of the parameters, because what made you think is a very, very broad umbrella. What exactly were you looking for?
Well, I think the first thing we were trying to do is to push back a little bit against what happens with these end-of-year lists, right? So you have this sort of platonic ideal of greatness that's pursued, you know, the greatest albums, the greatest films, the greatest books of the past year. And that notion always seemed a little bit absurd to me because, you know, especially with books, you know, it's such a subjective thing, you know, how a book reaches you, and the way that one interacts with the book and what one searches for in a book. So it struck us that at The Atlantic, the thing that made most sense for us was to distinguish those books that sort of, in a phrase, were good to think with, the books that sort of provoked thought, the books that opened up new worlds, that sort of allowed the reader access to a different way of thinking. Yes, I guess that still is pretty broad, but at least it narrows it down in ways that sort of made sense to us.
Yeah, I have to say it sounds like a good, solid Atlantic framework. OK, let's run through a few of them. We're not going to get to all 10, but several of them deal with dislocation immigrations. Talk about Stay True by, and I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right, Hua Hsu.
Hua Hsu, yes. So this is a book about friendship. Hua Hsu is a New Yorker writer who casts back to his early years in college and the friendship that he developed with another Asian American immigrant, and the story of sort of how they got to know each other, overcame their differences, and eventually this friend was actually killed, murdered. And so it's really a memoir in many ways, but exploring sort of the influences, the long-lasting influences of friendship on a human being.
And The Consequences by Manuel Munoz?
That's a wonderful series of short stories about farm laborers in Central California. And that's sort of fit the mold that we were looking for of books that exposed us to different sorts of realities that one might not have normally had access to. And fiction, of course, is an amazing way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and I love the breadth of this in terms of geography. A lot of them obviously set in the United States, but with immigrant experiences in the United States, like those two were. But I want to know more about the one about Modern Ireland, A Personal History of Modern Ireland by Fintan O'Toole. You've gone completely different there in terms of genre.
Right. Also just a beautifully written book, I should say. All of these books are of a certain literary quality that we really felt like we could endorse. And Fintan O'Toole's book in particular is just a beautifully written book. It's another one of these books. There's actually two or three on here that are sort of mixed memoir and history in interesting ways. You know, so he is telling both his own personal story of growing up in Ireland, his relationship to the country, but also the story of Ireland sort of entering into modernity in many ways. You know, so for example, he looks at a country that once was, you know, fiercely opposed to abortion, you know, and that has and same-sex marriage, and that has come to sort of evolve on those issues. And but he always does it within this framework of his own life and his own sort of relationship to the country and how it's changed over time.
OK, Gul Beckerman, thank you very much. The full list, by the way, of The Atlantic 10 is online at theatlantic.com. Senior editor for books at The Atlantic. Gul, thank you for joining us. And if you need some holiday reading, it's all there. They look great, all of them. I challenge you to get at least through a couple of them by the end of this year.